She bit into the apple before the bell had rung, and that was her first mistake. The Queen's kitchens followed silence before sound, and a maid with red juice on her lip was no longer invisible. She wiped it fast, but the steward had already seen. "Your name?" he asked, though they all knew it. She gave it anyway. Ellen. He didn't need the rest. He pointed to the corridor that led not to the servants' quarters, but to the constable's chamber. She moved quickly, head down, arms folded, though her apron still carried a smear. In the chamber, a single parchment lay open on the table. The steward's seal dripped beside it. "You've taken food without leave," the constable said, his voice dull with routine. "From the royal basket." She said nothing. "And you were overheard speaking with one of the printer's apprentices last night. He is under inquiry for spreading banned tracts." Her stomach dropped. That part was true. She'd asked about his dog, nothing more. The Lady Mary has been watching closely. She believes disloyalty begins below the stairs. He looked up, and she's rarely wrong. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Outside the small window, the cloister bell rang 6 times. He sealed the parchment and nodded to the guards. "She'll wait in the chapel. The bishop will see her before vespers." They took her by the arms, not roughly, but firmly. Through the narrow halls, past stone walls that had once felt safe, they led her through a wooden door she'd never seen open. The chapel was empty, save for the light catching the stained glass saints. She sat on the cold bench, hands in her lap. The guards remained just outside. On the floor beneath the pews, someone had scratched a symbol into the stone. Not a cross, but a circle split in 2. She stared at it without knowing why. A door opened behind her. Soft steps, robes brushing stone. She turned slowly. The man who entered wore no shoes. His robes were plain and unbelted. He did not bow. He did not speak. But when their eyes met, he nodded once, and something inside her, something wordless, leaned toward him. She did not know his name, but she knew she'd follow. He didn't sit beside her. He stood near the altar, hands folded, eyes steady. She stayed on the bench, her fingers curled into the folds of her apron. "They say, I spoke with a traitor," she said, "and I took an apple." His mouth twitched, not a smile, but the shape of one. "I've heard worse sins confessed at knife point," he said. His voice was low, even, with no trace of fear or polish. "Why are you here?" she asked. "You wear no seal." He stepped forward slowly, as though each move cost him something. "I don't belong to any order. Not anymore." She stared at him. "Then you're not a monk." "I was," he said, "until the abbey burned. Now I borrow the robes." He knelt beside the pew, resting one arm on the wood. "They're preparing your papers already. You'll be questioned under oath." "But I've done nothing," she said. He nodded. "That's rarely the point." A guard's footsteps echoed beyond the chapel door. She looked back, panic rising. "They said the bishop would see me." "He will," said the monk, "but not here." He rose. "When the candles are lit, the guards will kneel to pray. Only for a moment. You'll follow me then." "Why?" she whispered. "Why? Help me." He looked at the stained glass above them, a woman kneeling before a blade, her hands bound. "Because once," he said, "someone did the same for me." She stared at him, unsure if he was telling the truth or if the world had simply tipped into madness. "Where would I go?" she asked. "There's a passage below the sacristy," he said. "It leads to the garden wall. From there, the woods." "And then?" He met her eyes. "Then you keep walking." The candlelight flickered in the brass sconces. Outside, the bell for vespers began to chime. The monk turned toward the altar, bowed once, then disappeared behind the tapestries. She remained alone in the pew, the air growing colder. The guards opened the door and stepped inside. "Kneel," one said. "The bishop approaches." She lowered herself, heart pounding. But it was not the bishop's robes she saw enter. It was the monk's hand reaching from beneath the altar, open, waiting, and she took it. She followed him beneath the altar, crawling on her hands and knees through a space that stank of wax and damp stone. Behind them, the chapel hummed with hymns the guards couldn't finish before the candles burned down. The monk moved quickly despite the tight passage, ducking low under beams that bore centuries of dust. "This way," he whispered, brushing aside a slab of rotting linen to reveal stairs carved into the earth. "Where does it lead?" she asked. "Somewhere forgotten," he said. She didn't ask again. They descended into the dark, guided only by his memory and the faint echo of their own breath. At the bottom, the corridor widened. Stone gave way to packed earth, the air thick with roots that clawed through the ceiling like reaching hands. They passed rusted hinges, old tools, a child's broken rattle, remnants of lives hidden and hurried. "This place," she said, "wasn't built for prayer." "No," he replied, "it was built for hiding." At the final bend, a wooden hatch stood before them. He placed a palm against it, then turned to her. "When we leave here, you are no longer a maid," he said, "no longer accused. You are someone else." "Who?" she asked. "Who would believe me?" He didn't answer. He pushed the hatch and climbed through. She followed, blinking into sudden green. They were behind the monastery garden, hidden between two hedgerows where nettles grew wild, and the air smelled of crushed herbs. No one in the yard noticed. The bells still tolled. "They'll search for me," she said. "They'll come to the villages." "Then don't go to one," he said. "There's a shepherd's trail due north. It forks near the ruins of St. Edwin's Abbey. Take the second path. Keep walking." She hesitated. "And you?" "They won't look for me," he said. "They think I burned with the others." She wanted to ask what he'd done to deserve such a death, but she knew better. People like them didn't always need reasons. They just needed to be seen at the wrong time. She turned toward the field. "You knew I'd take your hand," she said. "No," he replied, "but I knew you'd had no choice before, and I believe in giving a second one." Then he stepped back into the earth, and she was alone again, but not lost. She kept to the narrow trail, as the monk had said, her skirt catching on bramble and briar, her feet soaked from morning dew. The trees whispered overhead, but no voices called out. Each step took her farther from the chapel, from the steward's parchment, from the apple she had bitten without thought. She passed a boundary stone carved with a faded cross, half buried in moss. "St. Edwin's," she whispered, and though she had never seen it, she knew this was the place. The abbey ruins came into view like bones under skin, arches shattered, stones blackened by fire, weeds climbing the altar's remains. She moved slowly through what had once been sacred, her eyes on the second path beyond the nave, just as he'd said. But before she reached it, she saw the cloak, brown, folded, and left neatly on the edge of a crumbled pew. A monk's robe. She stepped toward it and found beside it a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a scrap of parchment. "Keep north. Trust no house with a bell." She folded the note and pressed it against her chest. Behind her, dry branches snapped. She turned fast, heart kicking, but it was only a bird, black, flapping from the nave's hollow to the sky. Still, she moved quicker now, picking up the bread and holding it like something alive. The second path curved toward the river. She followed it, boots slipping on wet leaves, her breath sharp in her throat. Every noise felt larger than it was. Every rustle threatened a constable's foot. By dusk, she reached a clearing and crouched low behind a fallen tree. The bread was still warm. She ate slowly, watching the edge of the woods. No one came. She unwrapped the last bite and found, beneath the cloth, a strip of wool, the same grey as the monk's robe. He had left it, not as a message, but a presence, not a promise, but proof. She tucked it into her dress and lay flat against the earth, eyes open to the night above. The stars were silent. But the silence no longer frightened her. She had gone beyond where she was supposed to be, and something in her had decided to keep going. She rose before the sun, folding the monk's wool scrap into her apron, her fingers still stained from bark and sleep. The trail narrowed past the clearing, winding through heather and stone until it met a crooked bridge. She paused there. The river was wide, the water fast, and the wood beneath her boots was slick with frost. On the other side, smoke rose in thin strands from a chimney tucked low behind a willow. She remembered his words, trust no house with a bell, but this one had none. Just shutters drawn tight and silence. She crossed. Before her hand reached the door, it opened. The man inside wore no robes, no chain, no blade, only a worn shirt and a silver ring on his right hand. "You're a day behind the others," he said. She stepped back. "I don't follow others." "That's why you're still breathing," he said, and opened the door wider. Inside, the hearth burned low. A basin of water steamed on the coals. "You'll wash," he said, "then eat, then sleep. When you wake, I'll not be here." She didn't ask who he was. She stepped inside. The floor was clean, the walls bare. But beside the basin lay a folded cloth and a wooden comb, items too gentle to be for strangers. "There's a coat in the trunk," he added. "Not a maid's coat. Yours now." She turned to him. "Why help me?" "Because you were named by the steward," he said, "and he's never named anyone who deserved it." "You knew him?" "I knew his brother, before the fires." He looked at the ring on his hand. "The monk told me you'd come, said you had no place to go." "He was right," she said. He nodded once. "Then go where they cannot follow." He stepped past her, out the door, and into the early mist. She bathed, dressed in the coat, and ate the lentils he had left warming. She never saw his face clearly. But when she opened the trunk to return the coat, she found a second letter folded beneath it. Her name wasn't on it, but it was sealed with wax, pressed with the symbol she had seen beneath the chapel pews, the circle split in two. She tucked it beneath her sleeve. Then she left the house with no bell and no fear. She didn't open the letter until the sun reached its peak, when the woods thinned and the wind no longer stung her eyes. She sat beneath a rowan tree, the bark smooth beneath her back, and unfolded the parchment with fingers she hadn't warmed in 2 days. The wax broke clean, the mark clear, the circle divided by a line, like a seal left only for those who'd lost something they weren't allowed to name. Inside, the ink curved carefully, the hand not hurried but not ornate. It didn't greet her, it didn't mention her name. It began with a question. "What does freedom cost when you were never meant to own it?" She read the line twice, then a second followed. "Those who branded you did so with empty hands. You carry more than they ever dared." Her throat tightened. The letter spoke not like a warning, but a memory she hadn't earned. It told of others, servants, scribes, mothers, girls taken too early, women buried without headstones. Each one ran not to vanish, it said, but to live in full colour outside the grey halls of the known. She folded it once, pressed it to her chest, and didn't weep. The tears had dried with the chapel candle smoke. She stood and walked on, the letter inside her coat, her pace steadier now. The next village came at dusk. A line of low-roofed cottages by a frozen stream, a smithy with no fire, a chapel with no steeple. A woman was sweeping her step. She looked up as the girl passed. "You lost?" the woman asked. Looking for work? No, she said. Looking for a place that doesn't ask questions. The woman studied her face. Then you'd best try the weaver's barn. The priest's away, and no one else bothers with visitors. She nodded her thanks and kept walking. At the edge of the field, the barn rose like a shadow, unmarked, unswept. She climbed into the loft and lay on the hay, the letter in her hand. She traced the circle seal once more with her thumb. Tomorrow she would burn it, not because she didn't believe it, but because she already knew it by heart. And the next part of her story had no parchment left. She rose with the crows, brushing straw from her sleeves, and left the loft without waking the hens roosting below. The frost bit her boots, but she walked like someone used to cold, silent, steady, not hiding, only moving. Past the stream and the stone fence, a young man was chopping wood. He glanced up. "You don't belong here," he said. She kept walking. "That's not an insult," he added, "just truth." She stopped. "And where do I belong, then?" "Nowhere," he said. "That's what makes you harder to follow." She waited. He pointed down the track. "Cart path splits at the yew tree. Go west. Beyond the border stone there's a farm that takes hands for lambing. They won't ask." "Why help me?" she asked. He wiped the axe on his sleeve. "Because my mother cleaned for a bishop who wrote lies. And because you didn't bow when I spoke." She didn't thank him. She just went. The yew tree stood like a crooked finger, split at the trunk. She chose the western path, boots crunching frost, letter still inside her coat though she no longer needed it. She passed no one for hours, just sheep behind fences and a dog who barked and didn't chase. The farm was smaller than she'd imagined. One field, one shed, one house. An old woman stood beside a pile of fleece, her hands dyed blue from woad. "Looking for work?" she asked. "I'm looking for quiet," the girl replied. "Then you'll stay if you keep your mouth shut and your stitches straight," the woman said. "You know sheep?" "No," she said, "but I know what it is to be left in the cold." The woman nodded once. "That'll do." That night she slept beside the dye vats, warm for the first time in days. She didn't ask the old woman's name. She didn't offer her own. In the morning she joined the line of women sewing feed sacks, none of whom spoke more than was needed. And when she pricked her finger on a needle, she didn't wince. She wiped the blood, tied the thread, and kept working. No one asked where she came from, but when she didn't bow her head at prayers, no one scolded her either. She had walked far enough, it seemed, to belong. She spent the next weeks in silence, stitching sacks, carrying feed, learning which lambs needed turning in their sleep. The old woman never asked what she was running from, and the other workers, mostly widows and girls sent from other parishes, shared no pasts either. But every night before sleep, the girl traced the monk's seal in her mind. The circle split, a promise of something between survival and meaning. Then came the letter from the city, delivered in a grey bag with the salt and grain. The old woman didn't open it. She held it to the firelight and frowned. "They're naming names again," she said, "printing lists on walls. They think it cleans the kingdom." The girl stiffened. "Who sends them?" "Clerks, stewards, those who never bleed but love to watch others do it." She nodded slowly. "They'll be looking for me still. They'll look forever if no one tells them to stop." "And who would do that?" she asked. "No one ever knew me." The woman placed the unopened letter on the table. "That monk who sent you, he had a name. You didn't speak it, but you carry it in your coat, whether you know it or not." That night the girl lay awake on her straw mattress. Her hands hurt from the day's stitching, but her mind turned faster than her fingers ever could. She rose before dawn, took a piece of sacking cloth and stitched a name across it. Not hers. His. The one he never gave her, but that lived in the seal, in the bread, in the wool scrap folded still at her heart. She left it beside the dye vat with a note. Tell them the girl without a name remembers who gave her one. Then she walked toward the market road, coat tight, face calm. She didn't run, she didn't bow. She passed a guard patrol outside the chapel ruins and didn't flinch when one looked her way. Name? He asked. She said one, not hers, but strong. And it worked. He stepped aside. She didn't smile. She just walked on. Because the name they tried to burn was not ink or thread. It was survival. And it had chosen her. The square smelled of smoke long before she reached it. Market day had ended early. Stalls packed in haste. Barrels overturned. Footprints scattered in ash. At the center stood the pyre, freshly stacked, still unlit. She slowed her pace but didn't stop. The men who'd built it wore no colors, only chains across their chests. Treason burns clean, one muttered as he tied rope around a wooden post. She passed him without flinching. They say it was a scullery maid last time, another said. Spoke to a printer, ate from the Queen's basket. She kept walking. They didn't recognize her. The threadbare coat, the soot on her face, the silence in her posture. She had learned what the monk taught her, to move like someone who belonged to no story at all. At the edge of the square, the town clerk was nailing parchment to a wall, a list of names. Hers would have been on it once. She moved closer. The ink was fresh. Wind curled the bottom edge. She scanned the lines, heart steady. Her name was gone. A hand had crossed it out. In its place, another. A man's name, unfamiliar. Someone else had taken her place. Mistaken identity, the clerk muttered, or convenient switch. Either way, justice prefers movement. A woman nearby spat. Justice prefers silence. The pyre creaked behind them. She turned from the wall and entered the alley behind the chapel, the same way the monk once vanished. There, tucked beneath a stone, was a cloth pouch, small, tied with string. Inside, she found the wool scrap again, but darker now, stained with something old. Beneath it, another note. You were never meant to burn. Now walk like you never feared it. She tied the pouch inside her coat and stepped back into the street. A boy ran past, laughing. A widow adjusted her scarf. Life continued beside the fire because no one looked too long. That was the country's rule. If you didn't ask, you weren't to blame. She crossed the square without bowing, without glancing back. The fire began to crackle. She didn't stop. The rope snapped behind her. She didn't flinch. The man they meant to burn would die in her place. And still, she kept walking. She never returned to the chapel, nor to the farm with the dye vats, nor to the barn where she had burned the letter she could still recite by heart. Instead, she crossed the western border on foot, carrying only a shawl, a comb, and the monk's wool scrap sewn into her coat's lining. In a small coastal village where no one knew her voice, she told a woman at the fish stall that her name was Ellen. Not the name they accused, not the one they crossed off the wall, just Ellen. The woman nodded and said nothing. That night she slept beside a stove in the back of a salt house and woke with a job gutting cod. Her fingers moved fast. No one asked where she learned. Over the years, the villagers came to trust her not for what she said, but for what she never repeated. She knew who stole bread, who drank too early, who slipped letters to sailors. She knew it and kept it. That was her kind of loyalty. When the Queen died and the bishop's court collapsed, a boy with a travelling cart brought news from the capital. New names, new charges, but none of yours, he said, though he didn't know which were hers. She thanked him and returned to her work. She married once, a stonemason whose first wife had drowned, and when he died 10 winters later, she buried him herself. No priest, no bell, just her hands in the earth and a hymn she never sang aloud. In the final years, the town children called her Mother Ellen, though none of them were hers. She told them stories, never quite true, about maids and fires and monks with no names. And when she felt the end near, she packed a tin with 3 things: the wool scrap, the stitched name of the monk, and the circle symbol carved carefully into a coin she'd made herself. She left it with the youngest girl in the village. "If anyone ever asks who I was," she said, "tell them I walked away." No one built her a headstone, but every year on the day the Queen once condemned a maid to burn, someone left a folded cloth at the chapel ruins. No name, no seal, just a sign that she had lived, and had not vanished, even if no one witnessed how.